On today's episode, I sit down with Patrick Campbell. Patrick is an ex-intelligence officer turned Google strategist turned ProfitWell entrepreneur, where he founded and started a company called ProfitWell, where they look to effectively increase your recurring revenue model based on their methodology and their piece of technology. He's had it for 9 years, has a team of close to 100, and is truly inspiring when it comes to how he approaches structured growth, process, philosophy. We chatted a lot about all things that had nothing to do with scale before we jumped on. I hope you guys enjoy the episode as much as I did sitting and learning from Patrick. Hi, and welcome to Successful Scales, the show where I interview now successful professionals about their journey and try and garner insights onto any tips that can be applied to your business at home. Whether it's financial freedom or the exit of your company, wherever your journey may take you, the idea here is to simply learn from those who have done it before. I hope you enjoy and you get some value out of this. Buckle up and enjoy the episode. All right, Patrick, welcome to an episode of Successful Scales, mate. Thanks for jumping on.
Yeah, excited to be here. We should have been recording for a half hour, but that'll be the secret episode that we never release, basically. Our fun conversations about the world.
100%. It's typically how it goes. You know, you start the conversation, you get into this deep discussion that has absolutely nothing to do with the topics that you'd planned to talk about. And then before you know it, 15, 20, 30 minutes are gone. You get to that point where you're like, well, I better push record and actually try and add some value for other people, not just hog it all for myself. So thank you.
I think it's also, absolutely. I think it's also like the stuff we were talking about, and just to give people a little bit of context, was like more politics, what's happening in the world, these types of things. Those are things that ironically are, you know, it's kind of like your parents or someone told you, like, don't talk to people about religion, sex, politics, etc. And then you learn, like, those are the things that are there to talk about, right? Like, those are the things that are interesting. But when you're in a position of a company, it's like you can't really talk publicly about a lot of those things, or even, you know, Twitter or these types of things, because like they're just so hot buttons sometimes that people won't give you that charitable interpretation. And so whenever I meet founders or execs, we end up talking about those things because we have no outlet, you know, except for our family and friends and those types of things. So just that's me trying to transition this back to business somehow.
Nah, but you know what? It's true. It's like, you know, we probably couldn't have hit record and had that conversation without someone getting upset about the topic. So, you know, totally. I would even say, and I don't know if this is what it's like for you, and, you know, I'm going to get you to obviously talk a little bit about yourself so people understand who you are. But
sure.
I think that one of the challenges, you know, as a founder or as an exec or an entrepreneur, or, you know, whatever sort of category you want to put yourself into, it's something that you sort of eat, breathe, live, sleep. You know, you're super passionate about what you're looking to create in the world. And so, speaking of other people that you can have conversations like that with, you know, my fiance does not want to hear one more word about anything that is going on inside of my business. And you know what? I don't blame her for it. So
yeah,
I would say, you know, in the same position, being able to sit and have a chat with you about how to scale a business right now, this is the shit that excites me. This is the stuff that, you know, I get excited about learning and seeing how other people approach it and where they're going with it. And on that note, mate, I mean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about ProfitWell, but I mean, you've got a super interesting background, so I'll let you drive.
So just background, where do I come from, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you know how it goes.
Yeah, totally. So let me describe ProfitWell first. So basically, we build revenue automation products for subscription companies. So we're in the business of helping you get more subscription revenue in an automated way, to say that a little bit differently. And we have this free metrics product. You plug in your billing system, Stripe, Zora, Braintree, Recurly. If you're not a subscription business, you have no idea what I'm talking about. That's fine. But you plug in your billing system, and basically we give you access to all of your financial reporting for free. And so right now we have, depending on how you measure it, we have about 20 to 25% of the entire subscription market using that product. And then the way we make money is we, you know, have a couple of products that help with retention and with pricing. So help you retain more users, lower your cancellations, or help you monetize better. And My background, just given, that product and how that came to be, my background's in econometrics and math. And so I started my career, I actually worked in US intelligence, and we were talking about that a little bit. Before basically hunting bad guys or gals with data, essentially. And then I worked at Google, kind of doing some similar stuff, but hunting money. And then, like all entrepreneurs or most entrepreneurs, I was like, I want to work for myself. I want to work for myself. My hubris, my young hubris, especially, came to be. And I jumped out and kind of worked in the startup scene a little while before founding ProfitWell a while back. But yeah, I think we're bootstrapped. So that's a couple of other interesting things, meaning we haven't taken on any funding. We have nothing against VCs. We just haven't needed to raise funding yet. We're past 10 million in annual revenue. That's what they tell you. Once you're past 10 million, you don't say where your revenue is anymore. You just say you're between 10 and 100 and leave it at that. We have about 70 people in Argentina, Salt Lake City, and Boston. So yeah, that's the rambly kind of back of the baseball card, as they say, my stat line, if you will.
Well, that is a very impressive stat line, and definitely leads me to a bunch of questions. But firstly, amazing effort to do it. I mean, I think a lot of people that I've spoken to haven't taken that bootstrapped route. We personally did too, so I can definitely appreciate some of the challenges and the struggles. I mean, I'd love to even have a conversation a little bit about that,
Sure.
in the fact that people talk about a startup as this sexy, like, I want to go and work at a startup. I can't wait to get my hands dirty in a startup. And then there's like the VC back startup where you've got the sexy offices and the, expensive coffee machine, the marketing run events and all this shit going on. And then you've got a bootstrap startup where you're like, well, if I invest that 10 grand into marketing, can I pay all the salaries of the employee? Like, that's
exactly
that to me is sort of the juggling act. So a few questions rolled into this. The first is, you said that you had the itch, you went down the sort of entrepreneur startup route, you worked with a few beforehand, and then you started your own. What was sort of the driving decision? Was it to be, your own boss, so to speak? Like, was that sort of the indication, or was it the solution led, this is what I can do?
I think it was very, like, when I said hubris before, it was very hubris. It was very like, I don't think this is objectively true, but I always felt like I cared more than my bosses. So I come from a very like blue collar family. I milked cows as a kid, like grew up on, Dairyland in Wisconsin. And it's one of those things where like work is always a big part of my identity. Like I could be making, I don't know, desks, and like it'd be a huge part of my identity. Like it's just that's how I was, brought up. Like our idea of fun as a family was working, right? And so when I went into these institutions, like that worked out really, really well when I worked for the U.S. government. But the problem is that it's the U.S. government, hugely bureaucratic. So if you're a punk, ambitious kid who's like, I want to take on the world and like learn everything very quickly and all these and work hard and everything, it kind of like gives you a little bit of like, well, you can't go at this pace because of, this law or this bureaucracy or whatever it is. And then similarly, when I was at Google, it's another bureaucracy. And it was very much like when you get into these situations where it's like, well, you can't work on the cool stuff for another 2 years because you just have to sit in this role for 2 years because that's some policy. You start to learn like, oh, maybe I should get closer and closer to something that is direct, meaning I do the work and I see the results fail or succeed like really, really quickly. Right. So I thought it ended up being mostly that, like just the hubris. But I thought it was a little bit around money. I thought like, well, if I'm going to bust my butt, like I should get, because I built this algorithm that made Google a bunch of money. But I was like, hey, I want to get bigger cut than this like award that I got, for making that algorithm. And it was kind of like, oh, like let me jump out. But then I quickly realized, kind of to your point, startups, it's like, doesn't matter if you're venture backed or not. It's not like, there are easier ways to make money. Like there are easier ways to make money. Like, I think that yes, making money is a good part of it. Even if you have like the equivalent of like a corner store versus like a higher growth business, but like, it is one of those things where if you're doing it for the money, you're probably going to burn out really, really quickly. And for me, it just was like, I want that control. And then it's kind of evolved into what I really like doing. And I realized this through doing it was, I like the build. I like the growth. I like the movement. I like the cool. Now we're going to do this. Now we're going to add this puzzle piece, so on and so forth. And so that's kind of how it looks for me. And I know it's different for other entrepreneurs, but that's kind of my stack.
Well, I think also depending on the sort of the stage that you sit in as well would really, depend on sort of the way you visualize. And I think that it's a great point. If
Yeah.
you have the corner store and being more directly linked to the output, and that is going to yield a return, you've got to be in it for the long game if you want to build, a company to last. And you have to sort of have that infinite mindset around, well, what does this puzzle piece lead to, and how do I continue to build and, I would say, add value? How do I continue to evolve the offering to create more value so that I'm still relevant and I'm still current and I'm still having that impact? And
Yeah,
um
totally.
and so you're correct me if I'm wrong, you're 9 years into ProfitWell.
Yeah, in total, basically, yeah. I mean, we started off as this product called Price Intelligently, but Price Intelligently is technically part of ProfitWell. So yeah, so basically 9 years in. I'd say if we were just looking at kind of like our current iteration of the business, closer to 6 or 7, but it doesn't really matter in the long run.
So for sure, I guess the questions on the back of that is like, you've gone in that time period. Let's forget how impressive it is to go from 0 to 100 million. I don't know. Well, I don't know exactly. 99
We're not at
million.
100 million. I'll tell you, we're not at 100 million.
99 million. If
Yeah,
anyone's
yeah,
listening, but you know what I'm saying, somewhere between 10 and 100.
yeah. I gotcha.
So you've gone through the journey, right? You're already in a 10 percentile of startups that succeed. I would imagine that the bootstrap ones would even be a smaller percentile of, startups that succeed as well. And if I had to guess, I'd imagine you're starting to hit, an area, or you're probably well into that state of maturity where you understand the offering, you understand the clients, you understand what you're building, and things, you hope run pretty smoothly and run through. But I'd love to hear. Yeah, yeah. Don't do that. I'm only 18 months into what we're doing here. I'm looking at you saying, shit, I hope in 9 years' time I'm chilling. But I don't know if that's the case. So what's the journey been like? Like, what were some of the early challenges that you sort of shed coming into, let's call it, adulthood and maturity, and sort of what does it feel like throughout that journey?
Yeah. I think here's the funny thing about this, like it ends up being, how do I best put this? It ends up being very like relative. Like context really matters, right? So are we past the whole like, oh my gosh, this could go to zero? Yeah, we're like past that idea. Like the worst case scenario, we rethink the company and go, all right, we're optimizing for profit. We change how we make all of our decisions, and it's a good life, right? And it's going to be a good life either way, but I think we're still in this like, no, grow scale, that whole mindset. I think that the thing though that really changes is that you have a lot of PTSD when you're bootstrapping from the early days, because like you kind of said this, right? Like the thing that a lot of people who have VC money or just funding in general, they still have a little bit of PTSD of the early days, but because they have that cushion, it's just a little different, because the feeling of going to zero is almost kind of baked into the risk factor. It's like, hey, you're supposed to grow or you go to zero, right? It's not like, hey, you have something necessarily to lose, and it's not quite like that. So like I'm trying to, I don't think there is that big of a difference between someone who's VC versus bootstrap, but I think for us, I still remember the days where I was like, we didn't have a moment where I was like, we're not going to make payroll, but I certainly had a lot of moments where I was like, oh man, we can't hire this extra person because if something bad happens, then we might not make payroll, right? And it took a while to get over those humps, because I think that if we would have been able to get over it, and by we, I really mean me, we might have accelerated and we would be at the point we are here probably 2 to 3 years before we are. And it's just because like you get a little cautious, and this is the advantage of raising money, I think, is that you can be a bit less cautious. You're still probably going to be cautious on some level. But yeah, I think that it's just all relative. The problems I face today, they feel from a magnitude perspective the same as like 6 years ago, but those problems 6 years ago, like they were the same size for that time. Now I laugh and I go, I can't believe we worried about that. But at the time, it felt like the same feeling that we're having today because the stakes just keep changing. So yeah, you learn a lot of how to like get a hold of your horses, as they say, especially emotionally as you go through this process. And I think that's honestly like there'll be some sort of monetary outcome here. There already has been a bit for me. But like the long story short of it is like the emotional development and the maturity that I've been able to gain just by getting kicked in the face every day has been just insane. Like it's been just wild. And that's kind of what I hold on to is like, there's no way you can build and be successful without like shifting like your mind and shifting like how you approach things, just because that's literally what this is all about, is taking something and building it from nothing essentially.
I could not have put that better myself. And I just sat there sort of listening back to you thinking, like, I go through this, it's funny, like at the very start, not that we're such an old business, but, I've been doing stuff like this for long enough. It's like every incremental little knock that you get is the biggest deal ever. You lost a client, or you have some drama that's pulled up, or your team isn't operating, or like there was a breakdown in communication, or someone's payroll wasn't 100%, whatever the issue is. And like every day you're like, whoa. And now like, the biggest things can sort of come at you and you're like, okay, well, that's a problem. It's not how we anticipated it. Like I literally, before I got on this call with you, I was speaking to the guys at Prosper, which is a Amazon focused live event in Vegas in July. And we so really cool. And I'm super excited to get there. And, we just had this issue where now our team members from the Philippines can't get access to the US Embassy in Manila until after the event right now. So we've just invested like, probably one of our biggest marketing investments to date, because, we've done things, I would say, pretty intelligently around our focused growth. But this was the first time that it was very in the sweet spot. And now I'm like, well, shit, I've got like 10 grand tied up into this where I can't even fly a team over to head on. And, like I would have lost days of sleep over this, like, a year and a half ago. And today I'm like, okay, well, it's not ideal. We'll figure it out. Like they're probably not going to want to give us our money back, but hopefully they do. Or we can find a way.
The situation. Yeah. And like, it is kind of funny how like those problems, like I remember when COVID hit, everyone was freaking out for like at least a month, right? Because no one knew it was going to happen. No one knew, like, and we knew it was going to affect the obvious businesses. Like people who were doing remote were going to do great. People who were, restaurant software was going to do terrible. Like you just kind of knew that. And then there was everyone else in between. And it was just kind of funny is like, I think at least in the CEO seat, it might depend on like the structure of your business, but like I am that person like in our business where it's like, you're just super calm, right? Because these crises happen and you've experimented or had so many little ones, if not big ones, over time, and you rationalize your way out of them and you rationalize your way to a solution, that all of a sudden it's like, something like that happens. Like if that happened our first year, like 10 grand, holy cow, like, oh my gosh, 10 grand, like I can't believe it. And now it's like, yeah, it's still a lot of money, don't get me wrong, and I'm like still going to try to get it back, but I'm not like having a mild existential crisis over it. I'm kind of having a crap, like let's figure this out, that type of thing. And I think that's a really big thing. This is why like I think second time founders do relatively well even if they failed, because you've seen all this before. You've developed that mental and that emotional fortitude to be like, okay, this is a bad thing, how do we figure it out? Right. And it also means like, if you ever asked me, and been asked this on podcasts before, like, what are some of the big like problems, or what are the big existential crises that happened, or the big things where you thought, oh, we're not going to make it? It's actually really hard for me to answer, not because those things didn't happen. It's more just because like I've rationalized, because we got through them. Oh, it must not have been that big of a deal. Oh, that thing must not have been a big deal. Right. And there's nothing that's like, holy cow, I had to go to Vegas and put our payroll on black or something like that. There's some of those stories inside companies, but we don't have any of those stories. So it's hard to be like, oh, like these are the things that, could have sunk us, because we just don't have that mental, that mental mode.
100%. And I think it's just like how, a lot of the books that I read and the people that I sort of speak to, it's about incremental improvements, and it's, minor progress that, shifts and moves that flywheel in time. And so I think when you sort of look at the world that way, where nothing is going to happen overnight, then it's very unlikely that something of that magnitude, okay, Corona for sure. If you're in the restaurant game, I feel deeply sorry for you, and there's not a whole lot you can do. But for most things, you're going to find a way out of it. And, you also come from, you come, like you were saying, from a military intelligence background as well. My co-founder spent nearly 5 years in the military here in Israel. He's Australian too. And when I think about, like, when we look at the team, and he's like, some of them are stressed out, and he's like, I'm not putting any pressure on them, literally none. Like, I'm the most lenient person ever. It's all sort of, we just have a lot of high performers, and, they tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves to perform well. And it's all sort of self-created. But when I look at Lippy, and I'm just like, mate, you've literally had 100 soldiers on a battlefield, under you. Like, everything else has to be so muted for you in terms of a decision around, like, we've got to get this invoice out, or, we've got to attend. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that, to your point, second time founders, or going through and hitting rock bottom or close to it in terms of challenges, it creates who you are and who you're going to be.
Well, I think that's why. So just to be clear, I was on the civilian side, so I don't want to take away from anyone who's fully in the military there. But I think it's interesting, because that's why I know you're in Tel Aviv right now. Like, I think that's where, like, Israeli companies and founders are just fascinating. Like, my partner and I, we've talked about, we want to hire everyone who is like every Israeli we can, because I think that they come with that kind of mental fortitude because of the service they had to do. And obviously everyone's different, right? But just kind of in a mass, like, looking at it in aggregate. And that's why we like to hire a lot of veterans as well, is because, like, even if you weren't, like, in theater or something like that, like, you have discipline. And I think that discipline, not only from a, like, work product perspective, but also mentally, and hopefully you weren't in harm's way, because, let's just hope that you don't have to get that through being in harm's way. But it helps a ton when you're trying to build something, when there's a high amount of just uncertainty, and there's a high amount of emotional, like, rigor that kind of goes into things. And so, yeah, it was a really good experience for me, because it also, like you said, puts things into perspective of, like, all right, well, it's not that, it's not a Marine that might die. Like, we're not dealing with that right now. We're dealing with $10,000 that a conference, is messed up right now. So, it's definitely a perspective giver.
Yeah. And I think that it's that kind of adequate amount of pressure. I was just literally having a conversation last week about, I think it's called the J curve or the U curve of pressure, where, you perform at an optimal amount when you're in that sort of central quadrant of it, or section, where if it's too little pressure, you don't feel any need to deliver. And if it's too much pressure, you're overwhelmed. And so when I look at sort of military service and that delivery of what you've experienced, it probably builds you to a position where, again, everything probably feels like a little bit less pressure. And as a result, it makes sense. Yeah, I would. I don't know if it's when we talk about things on air versus off air, I would love to hear your position on Israeli team members. but I don't know. I don't know if it's for here. I mean, to be fair, I think, like, some of the greatest salespeople on planet Earth, for sure, and also some of the best technologists. I don't know who I was telling the other day about this, but there's a division here called the 8100, which is a large intelligence division here, and they actually, there's legend of it. I'm sure it exists. Someone told me the other day. There's, like, a fund attached to the 8100 division, so all the ex soldiers who were there came together and pulled money, so that every time they see talent coming up out of it and moving into commercial, they just snap them up. So I'm trying to get my
Yeah.
hands into that talent
There
pool.
are, yeah, I don't know. There are funds like that, especially related to Israeli intelligence, which is kind of interesting. And so I find the reason I said that and to maybe extrapolate it out to, you know, other folks, whether you're based in Israel or not, is I think that there's a lot of hardship on some level. You never want someone to go through hardship, but interestingly enough, the people who went through hardship tend to have some sort of superpower on some level, right? Like if you think about, you know, a lot of comedians, like really successful comedians or artists, right? They went through really bad hardship on some level. Not all of them, but a lot of them went through it, and they came out the other end with this like creativity. And maybe they were haunted by still the hardship, and they had like not a great life, and I'd rather exchange them not having to go through that hardship than getting the great art, right? But even in that sense, right? And I think that's what's really kind of fascinating. And we found this with our Argentina office as well, which, you know, doesn't have like a big military history. It's There's hardship in that country on many levels, right? And that hardship creates perspective. And this is like the case for diversity in general, I would argue. But in addition to that, this is also one of those things where like when you find that person who has had to struggle through something, even if it's all relative and it's as simple as they didn't get the award they wanted and they didn't get into the school they wanted or something like that, I think that failure is a bit of a crucible that creates someone who can like push themselves forward. And depending on how it looks, because personality is really, really hard to like predict and personality is really, really hard to read. But I think that like if I was all things being equal, I would take someone who was able to battle through some sort of hardship versus someone who hasn't. And you know, unfortunately, fortunately, depending on how you look at it, probably unfortunately in the grand scheme of things, you know, Israel has gone through a lot of hardship over the years, right? And so it's probably an understatement. So I'll just leave it at that. But I think it's just one of those things where that's created a lot of like really good entrepreneurs, at least in some particular lanes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, to echo that, I mean, I've lived here now 4 years, and I love it for the most part. I absolutely love Tel Aviv, the vibrance, the culture, the culinary scene, the nightlife. Like it's amazing. It really is amazing. One of the things that I found that has changed in me is exactly that, is that level of resilience and that hardship. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you're in a pressure cooker here where there's, you know, I mean, it's not felt on the daily. I'm not sitting here saying, shit, are we on the brink of war? That's
Mm.
which in reality right now, I don't know. But in, in general, you know, it's not something that I think about every day or even every week or even every month. You know,
Mm.
very rarely will I think about that. But I think what it does to the society in general is it creates this sort of like, it creates this element, this undertone of pressure. And as a result, you just have this, you know, ongoing, I don't know if fight or flight is the right, you know, phrase to use here, but going
Yeah.
to the store, going to do anything, like people are a little bit on edge here. And so you just
Yeah.
learn that my first couple of years here, I really invested like, all right, I'm going to be my polite Australian self, and I'm going to
Mm.
try and educate them on how we can sort of work through this together and get through a solution. And like, you know, you sort of get worn down, and then you realize like, I'm not in Kansas anymore.
Mm.
You know, you have to stand up for yourself, and you have to be pushing in a line. And if someone's gonna, you know, unfortunately talk shit to you, you know, you can't just sit there and take it. And these are things that you sort of deal with on the daily. So I think that
Mm.
that environment just, you know, again, having the luxury of jumping on a podcast with you and having such a high level
Totally.
stimulating conversation is so much more greatly appreciated for me, because the latter is me sort of fighting tooth and nail to get the post from the post office that should have been delivered to my door, but because they don't do that stuff here, that's what I had to deal
Yeah.
with, you know. So
Yeah. It's interesting.
it's a crazy place in the world. You know,
Mm.
I forget that I live in the Middle East. So, you know,
Yeah.
you quickly remember at times like going to the post office. But anyway, I've totally derailed us here. I'd actually love to ask you a little bit more about ProfitWell as well. I mean, you guys have massive market share, and I think that the business is a model in itself. I mean, you know, without even with making the assumption of the whole position of being in market is to help people generate more revenue for products that they're, likely effectively, or services they're effectively selling on a rig, you're really enabling them to create, so much value. Forget the potential exit multiple that a SaaS company might have if the growth trajectory is impacted and it's on the recurring revenue model, to the daily impact. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how it works. Who does this help? Because a lot of the listeners will be in the e-commerce space and adjacent, so probably relevant.
Yeah, I think we typically, maybe to answer that is, we help subscription e-commerce companies. So that would be we help subscription companies of all kinds, but there's B2B SaaS, there's consumer subscriptions, and then subscription e-commerce, and that's the most relevant to kind of the world of e-commerce. And I think that the whole thesis that we had and still have is the subscription in and of itself, and this is more of an advocacy of subscriptions in general, no matter your type of business. It's the first commerce model in the history of the world where the relationship is built directly into how you make money. So what I mean by that is, if you think about like the corner store of yesterday, right? Or, you still have a corner store, like that corner store does not know that you're actually going to come back. They may be able to predict you're going to come back, and they might be able to try to help you come back. But in the case of like commerce and retail, it's like, hey, like here's this coupon, please come back to get your milk here versus the store across the street or the store across, the town, right? And what's beautiful about a subscription is like it's built in. So I know you're coming back. I know you're going to be there. And as long as I do my job and provide you value, you're going to continue to stick around. And it's not that simple. Obviously, like providing the right type of value is a fun game to figure out, especially when it comes down to your packaging and your price and all these other things and who you're targeting. But it is one of those things where you start from a place of that relationship being consistent. And that's what a lot of e-commerce brands all go for. And then they talk about brand, and it's like, yeah, brand is great, don't get me wrong, but like think about how much you have to do in a non-one-to-one relationship way with your customers in order to get enough of them to think of you when they need that thing, and also think of you when they need that thing and be willing to wait for it from a shipping perspective, right? And so that's where I think that like if I had something, i.e. a subscription, that could just bake that relationship in, like why wouldn't I do that, right? And it doesn't work for everybody in the right way, and you have to kind of apply it in different ways, but that's the first thesis. And I think relationships ultimately win. And so I think subscriptions, that's kind of the horse we've hitched our journey to. The other big thing that we've thought through is, and this is kind of relevant to a lot of brands and businesses, is that we weren't big fans of freemium before, but now we have a very large freemium product. And where that came from was we realized that we needed not only data, but we needed to nurture leads. So unlike a lot of e-commerce brands, for our brand, there's only about 150,000 target customers in our space. And that's a lot of people are surprised by that. There's like, well, there's not, millions of subscription companies. No, there's not. Right. And so because of that, we need to nurture our own leads. Right. And so freemium, what really helped with it was, hey, we can provide you a ton of value. And our goal is to always provide you so much value you feel bad. Right. Because you're just like, I can't believe I'm getting this for free. And then inevitably that helps us not only like convince you to take a sales call or to get on one of our paid products, but it also helps us basically position the company in a way where we're able to study all of this data and then use that data to make our rest of our product line, including the free product, but also our paid products, better and better. So it ends up being a really big moat that we're able to latch ourselves onto and basically grow from.
I love it. I absolutely love that. And it's so much of my philosophy in life, in business, and how to approach it. The fact that it's just so serendipitous to have a conversation like this as we sort of delve into this, into the SaaS solution space later this year. We'll have our first internal products in market, late this quarter, but not super relevant for e-commerce sellers. It's more to service our existing clients in the Multiply Me business. But I think like if people can take that from a marketing standpoint, the freemium model, where how do I add value first? How do I get people bought in to the fact that, the shit I give away for free is so badass that if you're going to pay me for it, then obviously it's going to be this incredible premium solution. So I think that like if I sort of break down your position of, much bigger audience, nurturing those leads, leveraging the insights and the performance of what's happening as effectively their investment back to you. So yes, free, but free means I can effectively start to build solutions, support you further. Yeah, it's no surprise you sit where you sit today, because that's a big part of it, is how do you get access to the audience to test, to make sure that you're building solutions that actually add value. And yeah, you've solved that by just simply adding value and giving first.
Yeah. Well, I also think it's like to pull back a second, in what really gets interesting is, if you just look at the market in general, and this affects everybody, it doesn't matter what type of business you're in. We all were convinced, we as business entrepreneurs and such, that all of a sudden, like, you know, the internet wave was the thing, right? And it very much was, right? Like everyone started getting connected, e-commerce existed, software products through SaaS, all these different things started happening. The problem is that the first kind of 20 years of this millennium, or this century, depending on when we look at it, same thing. But like the first 20 years, you had this phenomenon where every single quarter it got cheaper and cheaper to build stuff. Fulfillment got easier, deploying product got easier, deploying, it doesn't matter what you are. And so to the point where if all of us wanted to like spin up a new company by the end of the day today, we could spin up new servers, a website, fulfillment center for e-commerce, whatever it is, and basically get moving. And so the thing to kind of keep in mind is, all of a sudden, like while that was happening, every single quarter we were getting a brand new marketing channel as well. Google AdWords, a penny a click, display ads, remarketing, all of these different things, right? And so you have this like really crazy decade or so where all of a sudden you just have like just the gold rush, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it convinced us that we were geniuses. It convinced us we were good at our jobs. It convinced us we're good at building product. And some of us are, but in aggregate, we probably weren't as good as we thought, because we were just riding this massive wave, right? And it wasn't as easy as just throwing something out there and seeing how it does. But what's happened in the past couple of years is we're now in a market where the number of competitors you have, both direct and indirect, has gone from like 2 to 3 in your first year of business to about 12 in your first year of business. Customer acquisition costs are up 70%. Basically over the past 6-7 years, meaning like customer that once cost you $100 to acquire is now costing you $170. And this is the same no matter the vertical. Consumer products, B2B products, doesn't matter. We've just seen it time and time again. And even willingness to pay has dropped because there's just more stuff out there. Products used to be magical because it was like, oh my gosh, like you put a login screen on a database, you must be a god, right? And now it's like, doesn't have good support, doesn't have good, design. Like I'm not even going to give you the time of day, right?
Yep.
And so what I'm trying to get across is just like, this is why figuring out how to have that relationship, how to show that value, how to optimize that value, and ultimately figuring out how can you monetize that customer better, not in like a tricky or schemy way, but just like, how do I make sure that my, low-end customers get the high volume product and my high-end customers get the premium product, and also keeping those customers around in as long as humanly possible, either through a subscription or repeat purchases if you're just traditional e-commerce or retail. That's the key. That's the key now, because you're not going to make a lot of money on that first purchase in a lot of ways. You're going to make all your money up on, the second and third and fourth purchase, hopefully. And so, yeah, I think it's just a market that we're in where nurturing these leads and, providing value up front. And this is where inbound came from, and now freemium and all these other things, just so crucial.
Yeah, you are preaching to the choir here. I'm
100%.
I'm sitting here and I'm thinking exactly that. If I'm looking at the way in which to grow business, it's about value creation long term. It's not about some transactional purchase. If I'm going to invest that much money and time, effort, and energy and resource into the acquisition, and it only lasts me 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, then to go and find and do, and another marketing opportunity here, and we haven't gone down the paid media, remarketing, any of that stuff yet. I'm sure we will. But, to your point, you have to be building better products today, or better services, or better solutions. And you have to be thinking about the long-term value creation. And I would say you can't even sleep on the value creation at that moment in time. It has to be adaptive and incrementally improved over time, so that you can continue to push forward that value and hold on to your subscription model. And I also agree. I think that it's the smartest model to sort of create, actually, predictable growth and predictable value, and to have that deep-seated relationship with your client partner.
Yeah, 100%.
Mate, I wish I had more time. This is awesome. I feel like I want to do a whole session with you just on marketing, because I got a glimpse into the way you think, and I would be shocked if you didn't have some pretty awesome insights. But maybe we can take that one, like some of our other conversations, off air and keep chatting. But mate, I just want to say thank you so much for sitting down with me today. It was fun before pushing record, hitting record. I think that from a personal level, a ton of value was sort of learned in just looking at your logic, and I'm sure people listening too would have got value. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, find out more about ProfitWell or anything beyond that, what would be the best way?
Yeah, so just ProfitWell.com is where we have a ton of content. Yeah, we didn't get into marketing that much, but we do a lot of media. We have 7 different podcasts and video series, so there's a lot we could talk about there, and why we do that. It goes into the thesis about the market. I'm just PC at ProfitWell.com. It's probably just easiest to hit me up there. I am on LinkedIn, but I'm not great at checking my LinkedIn messages, but feel free to connect. I post a lot of data and stuff there as well. But yeah, thanks for having me, man. And hopefully we'll be able to chat more in the future.
Absolutely, mate. Again, thank you. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome.